Hi, I'm Kawiak Jones, and welcome to the second episode of my series of films about the fortified front of the Barta River. Today, I'm going to show you the fortifications from underground. To do this, we must enter the system through a 250-meter long tunnel, which is only 130 centimeters tall. This tunnel is part of the drainage system and served as an emergency exit. I'm with my friend Bogo again, and we both have two backpacks, one on our back and another on our chest, which have a combined weight of almost 40 kilograms. Luckily, we have a small trolley which helped us to get our equipment to our destination. Struggling through the small tunnel, we only took 5 short breaks to catch our breath. At the end of this tunnel, we reached an unfinished entrance block, which was almost 5 meters high and gave us a much-needed break. As I mentioned in the previous episode, the system was only 30% completed. There were plans to have 5 entrance blocks, but only 3 were started and only one, A64, was finished. What you see here is an unfinished raw tunnel, where even the floor and railway tracks have not been laid. The elliptical-shaped form gave the tunnel great strength and meant this structure was able to withstand the inward pressure from the surrounding ground. The tunnels were built by excavating the soil and sand, and the first formwork was laid, which prevented soil from falling back into the excavation. Then a second formwork was constructed, this time inside the tunnel itself, and concrete was pumped between the formworks. This type of construction allowed work to be continued ahead of freshly cast fragments. Let's focus on the material from which the entire system was built. First, the concrete itself. Portland cement was the material of choice. For each cubic centimeter of concrete, some 400 kilograms of cement was used, which gave the mixture a hardness of approximately B40. In comparison, the hardest German motorways are built from B25 hardness and modern houses to B20 hardness. As if the concrete itself wasn't enough, each wall was reinforced with a mesh of 12mm diameter steel rods, which created a grid structure which resembles cubes. In total, every cubic meter of the tunnel wall is made from about 1,500 kilograms of steel rods and 400 kilograms of cement. It is hard to comprehend the amount of material that was used as these tunnels continue for over 30 kilometers. After several hundred meters, we reach one of the many underground stations. Carrying 2 heavy backpacks all this way begins to take its toll on us, and we are in a lot of pain. In addition, the weight coupled with the high center of gravity which makes it difficult to maintain balance on sloped surfaces. We complain like any other pole, but we came there with a job to do. The train station we just came to is called Barta. The underground stations served as places where trains could pass by each other, load or unload their cargo, have their batteries recharged, and serve to some extent as depots. The stations were also equipped with toilets and additional rooms. They were to be closed at both ends and heated by the air blowers placed in these bays. Each station was equipped with holes in the walls, in which it was intended to install beams supporting a second floor that could serve as a hospital, warehouse, or even used for defense. Few were aware that the stations were to be defended at both ends from this second level with machine gun posts hidden behind armored plates manned by soldiers lying on the concrete floor. Another interesting thing is the thickness of the walls of the stations. Because of their size, they had to resist huge pressure from the surrounding ground and rock. If the walls were too thin, the entire station would collapse under the pressure. Thus, each station had reinforced walls of 120 centimeters and 80 centimeters thick ceiling. We selected Panzerwerk 732 as our first object to explore. It was not on the way to our destination, and despite hauling our heavy equipment, we felt the extra kilometer we would have to walk was well worth it. On the way, we encountered numerous holes punched in the tunnel's brick walls, which were then sealed up to prevent the sand and soil from entering the tunnel. These blind alleys date from 1939 to 1941, when Hitler decided to stop work on the front and only certain works were allowed on the system, as Hitler declared that he needed tanks, not bunkers in the east. Treasure hunters often break into these bricked-up dead ends, leaving behind them massive scars on the entire system. It is foolish to believe that the Russians after the war did not search the tunnels for loot inch by inch. Treasure hunters fail to realize that behind the bricks is only sand. I understand they want to find something of worth, but even the Russians resealed the walls to avoid sand seeping into the tunnel and eventually clogging the drainage system, as well as making the area difficult to pass by bike or foot. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of such bricked up walls across the system, but I've only managed to come across a few that are intact. A bit further, at the fork, we pass another pierced bricked up wall which would have led to the 734 and 735 objects, which never went past the planning stage. The tunnel ends with a brick wall, and depending on the level of the groundwater, is flooded or full of clay and mud. Dampness in this section was probably the reason for abandoning construction. Beyond the brick wall, you can often even see the change due to the lack of air circulation. The air is heavy, unpleasant, and occasionally in the torchlight you'll see fog. Once, this stretch was flooded right up to the ceiling. Thanks to this, we can now admire the dried limestone deposits which look like construction foam used by builders, but is 100% natural. There are still electrical components in the middle, and the tunnel is relatively undamaged by treasure hunters as few people come here. With Bogu, we return to our main route and continue on to Object 732. Both underground and on the surface, this object was almost identical to 730, which I discussed in the previous episode. Standardization of the objects significantly reduced the cost of their construction. A small 2-story barracks system with a generator room and a water well, which is unfortunately filled with trash. A shaft some 29 meters deep gives you an idea of how many tons of earth is above our heads. There are places for sleeping and camping in the barracks. Yes, you can sleep underground, and after doing it for a few nights, I strongly recommend it to everybody. The feeling when you open your eyes in the morning and you see the same thing you saw as when they were closed is amazing and unforgettable. Another thing is that it can sometimes be cold, but underground sleeping is a topic for another episode. The camping area is located in a supply room and the sleeping area in the former freezer. In the first room, someone built a makeshift table with benches, and until recently you could still lock the Type 6.5 P9 armor door from the inside. I say until recently because some time ago a handle from the doors disappeared. Unfortunately, the high-quality steel used in the fortification made them a prime target to be sold as scrap metal. An interesting fact about this object is that once by chance I met a person who managed to receive a signal from a Polish radio station at a depth of 30 meters on a normal radio. After exploring, the same way back waited for us, only now we were both very tired and the weight of our backpacks felt as though they had doubled, and we were at the stage where neither of us was able to put them on by ourselves, so we had to help each other. We were talking less and less and even lacked the energy to complain. But still, we had to move forward because giving up was not an option. We could hardly call an Uber to come pick us up. And so, step by step, meter by meter, we went back to Barta station again from where we headed south. We had to trek nearly a kilometer to reach the next station, Caesar. Walking all this way underground could at first sight appear monotonous, but I would rather compare it to being in an art gallery created by man and nature. We pass beautiful limestone deposits along the way, and the dark gray background suddenly becomes a colorful yellow-orange-white mix, where we felt like we entered the belly of a whale. Our attention is also drawn to the graffiti on the walls, and this may be a topic for another episode. Although I am against graffiti here, sometimes it's very interesting, but more often than not, it's unfortunately dominated by crotches and scruffy signatures, which is a total eyesore. Sometimes you can find hidden gems in the form of marks left behind by the original builders. We pass more examples of vandalism, as well as further clever technical solutions. An example of the vandalism is the paving tiles torn off the floor. At this point, we are not aware of how hard they will make it for us to pass through on our way back. Among the ingenious technical solutions is a water-resistant glass water sheath, which covers the tunnel walls in places where the builders encountered underground waterways. The coating is waterproof to this day, which is a great achievement, and if it is interrupted somewhere, it is solely due to pseudo-treasure seekers who have damaged it. After another 15 minutes of walking, we reach Caesar Station. We are almost on the edge of deciding to abandon our packs in the corner and simply get out of here as soon as possible. But real men only go home when the job is done, so we move forward. Caesar is very similar to the previous and almost every other station in the system. As I mentioned earlier, standardization is the name of the game, and it allowed the system to be built fast and cheap. In front of the station itself, there is a branch line that takes us east, towards the next train station, Nordpol. It is one of the 2 stations built outside the main line. Directly by the station is Object 730, which we visited from above, and soon we will see it from underground. But first, to satisfy the technicians, let's look at the internal defense system. Remember how in the previous episode I said what must be overcome to get to such a bunker? Well, if you think it's over, then you're sorely mistaken. Some of the objects that departed from the main line had machine gun posts, hidden behind anti-ricochet shields to stop stray bullets entering the machine gun posts. Built in a tunnel arch just in front of a few hundred meters of straight tunnel, where there was nowhere for the enemy to hide or even attempt to storm the machine gun posts. But even if somehow an enemy managed to get past the machine gun fire, there was a grill with a hole for a gun. And if somehow the enemy overcame this obstacle, there was an explosive surprise waiting. Tubes filled with explosives were buried in the walls, which once detonated, collapsed the whole tunnel and cut the branch off from the main line. The whole concept of defense of the system even had a name, Persistence Defense System. But I will go into more depth about this in my 4th episode. The numerous amount of ingenious technical solutions used to build these fortifications make a powerful impression even 80 years after construction began, and it still never fails to impress me. At last, we have reached the fork to Object 730. The short, almost perpendicular tunnel leads us to the shaft. It was this object you saw in the previous episode. The object, once fitted with a lift, is now only a rusty mess. In the 1950s, scrap hunters overloaded the lift with rocks in order to break it. Since then, the lift has been crushed in the undercarriage. Everything above literally hangs on a string. It is also worth paying attention to the drawings on the walls, which are certainly at least several decades old. There is a charcoal sketch of the system plan, a view of the object you saw in the first episode, with the most important information about it. That's enough about Object 730, and it's time to move forward towards the Nord Pole Station, which is located just behind the corner. It looks almost like any other station in the system. Huge brick elements suggest that it was supposed to be extended to include additional rooms, probably barracks. What's interesting is the east end. You can see how suddenly construction work stopped, and for years it has been a very photogenic place. The right tunnel leads to Object 727, which I will discuss soon, but first we head towards the left tunnel and the main destination of our entire journey, where we will finally use the mysterious and ever heavier content of our backpacks. The deeper we enter the tunnel, the more we see limestone infiltration. Stalagmites and stalactites grow more and more frequently. In a few hundred years, these points will join in the middle of the road, creating stalagnats. After a while, the tunnel looks like it was all in pimples. In about 50 years, this place will probably be one of the most beautiful in the whole complex. The tunnel descends gently, just 3 meters over a distance of 300 meters, which indicates that we are approaching the drainage tunnel. And that drainage tunnel is the background to a very interesting story that awaits you in the next episode.